Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is Louisa Rogers. Louisa is a leadership coach, trainer, and writer, an international traveler who grew up living in different parts of the world. She divides her time between Eureka, California, and Guanajuato. She'll probably tell me how to pronounce that correctly. Guanajuato, Mexico. Louisa is a leadership consultant who has worked with business groups in 10 countries and is a freelance writer, writing on psychological and physical health, food, relationships, travel, and spirituality. Her personal essays have been published in the PBS affiliate Next Avenue, in Unity Magazine, Catholic Digest, Turning Wheel, and several Benedictine magazines. So we're really glad to have you here with us today, Louisa.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. Maybe you can start by just kind of letting us know your feelings, thoughts about the whole pandemic that we're going through.
Oh, well, it's a big one. It's probably the biggest community issue that has happened in my lifetime. I mean, I was born during the Korean War or just before it, but of course I don't have any consciousness of it. I lived through the Vietnam War. I lived through the tumultuous 60s. I lived through 9/11. But I'd say this is the biggest of all because it reaches everybody. No one is immune. We're all in it. And in that sense, it has the powerful potential to unify us all, because we are all vulnerable in a way that in some of those other ones, say had I lived in World War II, everybody was involved in that, but I didn't live during that era, so it doesn't speak to me in the same way. It has the potential to really change us. As I said in a recent essay, will we heed the call is the question. And I'm very much in the middle. Part of me is extremely, extremely skeptical. I really don't think we can. On the other hand, I haven't given up hope. I'm somewhere in the middle there. I'm not naive. I recognize the depth of human issues we have to grapple with. I don't blame us, frankly. I don't blame us for greed, for fear, all those things. I think part of those are just the way we are wired. They're not all the way we're wired. They're partly with the way we're conditioned, but it's partly the way we're wired. So how do we kind of deal with this neurological, biological issue we are facing inwardly and outwardly? It's just a huge koan, as the Buddhists say, meaning a question that a riddle that doesn't have a yes-no answer. It's kind of it's a mystery. We'll find out. But definitely the biggest thing I think the world has faced in my lifetime.
Well, what do you think are some of the positive potential outcomes of all of this?
Well, just the fact that to be vulnerable together and to recognize our vulnerability together is huge. Also, I am so moved by the risks that many people are taking, and you can't help but be moved. I mean, the frontliners, the people, every time I go to the grocery store, I say to the cashier, thank you. These are the people who have the most to risk. They're paid the least, some of them. Some are okay paid, but not all. They're paid the least, and yet there they are out there. And I know, of course, they're not doing it entirely out of altruism. They have to feed themselves. But nonetheless, I think about my father is in an assisted living facility, and recently he had to go to the hospital. It was very scary for my sisters and me because he had symptoms that certainly sounded like the virus. It turns out he had a urinary tract infection, and that is apparently a side effect of having a catheter, which he recently had to have inserted. So he has a catheter. I didn't realize that UTIs are kind of part of that package. But when I think about, he has now since returned and he's good, he's healthy. But I think about the staff who now are in protective gear because he's considered a possible exposure, which he is because he's been in other facilities. I think of this wonderful staff who I know now. I know them all by name. They adore him. They take care of him. These are the people who are the paid the least, who do the, the icky, smelly, bodily stuff that no one else wants to do. Frequently, not always, frequently they're people from other countries who don't have much, who struggle with immigration status and all that kind of thing. Anyway, here are these people who are just taking care of my father. And I asked the director at Christmas time, my sisters and I said, can we tip them? We want to do something. Well, we weren't allowed. Whether it was the policy or the legality, I'm not sure what it was, but we weren't allowed. But the director she said, this was even before the virus. She said, you'd be amazed how little they are thanked for their work. So if you just wrote them a thank you card, that would make a huge difference. So we did. But anyway, I just think part of one of the many positive things is being touched and moved and grateful by those people who are putting themselves out for the rest of us who are not putting ourselves out. Maybe we all are in some small ways, but some people are doing it in really mega ways. So that's one of the many positive things.
No, I would totally agree. I think a lot of increased awareness of what those people do and the risks that they're taking right now, which I think is very good for all of us to keep in mind. So, so you split your time between Northern California and Mexico. So I'm curious as to what you've seen, what you've observed relative to the impact of the coronavirus in those two locations.
Well, we left Mexico. It was happening. I mean, in January, when I was first reading it, we were in Mexico, and I was following it because I was curious about it. But when we left Mexico, which was at the end of February, nothing much was happening yet. Cases were beginning to happen in the U.S. and in Mexico, but it wasn't, as far as in our part of the world, it was not part of the media. So now Mexico has risen to the occasion, but it began late, and it has worried me. And their cases are increasing, and they are multiplying more in certain parts of the country, just like here, in certain parts of the country than here. But compared to us, they're nothing. They have almost nothing compared to the U.S. So I remember saying to a friend of mine, a Canadian who's actually a former U.S. but moved to Canada in the 70s, I said, I have a feeling I've heard Mexico might be the next Italy. And she said, I've heard the U.S. This is back 2 months ago. She said, oh, I've heard the U.S. will be the next Italy. Well, yeah, she was right. It became the next Italy. Anyway, I am concerned for Mexicans. Some of them, from what I hear, my friends who are there say that not everyone takes it seriously and believes it. Same is true here, of course. So who knows? We have to wait and see.
Okay. What about your area in California there?
We are very respectful. I'm very grateful. There are a few demonstrators I noticed just a few days ago outside the county administration office are, saying we need to bring open things up. Our governor was one of the first to put shelter in place across the whole state, and he shut down the beaches in Southern California a while ago. I was so relieved. The ocean is truly a spiritual gift, and if I couldn't go to the ocean, I feel very, very different than I do. I just feel I'm so lucky that we have relative freedom of movement in our part of California. But where we are, everybody's extremely respectful. So I'm very grateful.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah.
So in these interviews, we've been talking a lot about, how God's helped us through challenging times in the past and, what we can draw upon that, to help us now. What are your thoughts in that regard?
Well, I have gone through a lot. I'm 68 years And I've been through things for almost 50 years that have challenged me to the core. Starting at the age of 21, when I was raped by a stranger with a knife in New Orleans. It was quite ghoulish, really. He raped me in a cemetery. It's amazing, just amazing. Anyway, that was a huge, obviously, how could it not be? It was just a huge trauma. But it took many years to respect it as a trauma because my way of dealing with it mostly was to disassociate. It's not that I denied it. I reported it, which is very unusual, especially then. But I reported it. I never kept it a secret. But I denied the emotional impact of it for probably 20 years. And I've since discovered 20 years seems to be, I'm not speaking as a scientist, I can't prove this, but I've just discovered informally that that's often about how long it takes for someone to begin to grapple with something very terrible that they went through. Anyway, I have integrated the rape into my life, and very rarely is it something that comes up. Occasionally, but not often. But I had to, it took a lot of internal work and writing. You asked tools. For me, writing. Both my journal writing, kind of just extemporaneous, but also shaped writing, because I find that writing where I actually have to craft it is very therapeutic. I have to kind of detach myself a bit from the core message and sort of think about it from different prisms, different perspectives, points of view. And that is extremely helpful. Probably the most powerful thing I did, and this was after I spent almost a year in what the Buddhists call a sesshin. A sesshin is like a retreat. I mean, it felt like one of the infinity pools where you just kind of, you're swimming forever and you wonder if you're ever going to come up for air. But this was, again, in the early 90s, so about 20 years ago. And during this period where I was gathering a lot of data, information, I was writing letters, getting letters from people who knew me at the time, because I'd kind of, when you deny what impact it had, you also kind of forget who you were. I forgot who I was, for sure. I didn't really remember much about that 21-year-old. So I wrote everybody I knew, friends and family, and at the college, and asked them to share with me. It felt like a bit of a risk, some of doing that, but I was slowly, incrementally ready to do it. Anyway, the point of all this is I'd been spending a lot of time exploring all this. And then there came a time when I was ready. And what I did was I wrote the story, the parts that I knew, from the man who raped me's point of view. In other words, I gave him his story. And then I gave a prelude, which of course was completely imagined. It was my fictionalized version. What happened to him? It happened at around 6:20 in the morning, being the rape experience. So I imagined him waking up sometime around 5:45. I imagined where he lived. I imagined him leaving his home, coming towards me, because I'm sure it was a planned rape, I'm sure. And then I imagined what he did after. I did the whole thing from his perspective. And it was incredible. It released me. Whatever hold he still had on me, by giving him his story, freed me. It's like I was done.
Wow.
There's a Quaker pacifist who died, I don't know, sometime in the last 5 years. Her name was Jean Knudsen Hoffman, and she had a line. Her line was, "An enemy is one whose story has not been told." So I told his story, and I humanized him, because he was he was someone who obviously had a great deal of pain, huge amount of pain. So I told his story.
Wow. That's really something. It's really wonderful that it helped that much.
It's great. So writing is, and I don't think writing is for everyone. It's not everyone's calling. I'm grateful it is mine, but I think anybody can be called to something creative, whether it's paint or color or sculpture or dance, or I think it's wired again. I think it's wired in us to have some sort of creative source that will, like you're doing interviews. That's a form of creativity.
Yeah, they've been fantastic. I mean, hearing so many people's stories and their thoughts about this whole experience that we're going through has been really great.
I bet. Yeah.
So besides writing, what other kinds of tools or resources, books, what have you been suggesting to people or been helpful to you?
Other ones are some kind of practice. I love, I've done various types. I've been a member of a Zen Buddhist group for a while. I'm not now, except when I'm in Mexico. Barry and I do meditate with this group, but it's not relational. The group doesn't get together and talk. All we do is sit in silence. And I've been part of centering prayer groups. I've done various things. My current practice is that Barry and I, when we're in Eureka, we meditate together 3 times a week. In Mexico, we meditate with this group 3 or 4 times a week. So I believe some sort of stillness. That whole, was it Pascal who said, all men's problems develop from the inability to sit still in a room? I think is absolutely valid. So the ability somehow to keep practicing, and it's not a skill you just develop and land there and it's an ongoing practice to somehow quiet, if not the mind, because the mind doesn't always quiet even if you're sitting still, but at least attempt to quiet the mind and be still. Attempt to distraction focus. So that's another one. I find exercise. I don't really like the word exercise. I prefer the word movement because exercise sounds very structured, and it is structured, but it doesn't have to be. My forms of exercise currently, they vary over times and so on. I can't run anymore, which is a great loss. I have a bad ankle from a parachuting accident 30 years ago, and I can't put that much pressure on my ankle anymore. But walking and my paddle board, which gives me great joy. I love my paddle board. Oh, love my paddle board. Anyway, those are mine. But I believe movement. I just believe it's spiritual. We're designed to move. We move inside. Our blood is moving. Our heart is beating. Inside we move. All of this, nothing is still. Everything is in constant motion. That's how we're set up to be. And another one is nature. Oh, I just love. I was telling Barry, we were walking along a slough. It was very quiet, gray afternoon, very kind of North Coast, our kind of weather. It was so beautiful and so quiet. And I just said, any kind of nature makes. I'm lucky. I'm a fairly cheerful person anyway. I don't suffer from depression. I take those very seriously. I know people in my life who do, and I'm very aware of the importance of taking that seriously. Luckily, I happen not to have that particular issue, but still I have my moods. I have my ups and downs and everything, but nature will always cheer me up, always. And it doesn't even matter what kind. It preferences. It could be the ocean, it could be the mountains. I mean, I love anything. But especially, the ocean. Last year in the summer, I broke I broke my wrist. It was just, oh, it was awful. My husband, Barry, was away, so I really learned a lot about isolation. Even though I had friends who supported me, I really got it about what it's like not to have someone when you're helpless. Anyway, when physical therapy time came, I had to drive to my therapist, and one of the ways to drive was along the way where you could stop at a beach and go and walk at the beach. And it's really funny that I'd lived here all those years and not really taken advantage of the beach on a weekly basis. I was seeing her about twice a week at the beginning. So I just made it my route to go along that route, one of the ways, and make sure that I stopped at the beach. And suddenly it just became part of life. So now it's part of my habitual life. So I guess I have to thank the broken wrist.
It's funny how some things will cause something else wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Since you said that, I'll give you two examples. I probably would never have met the man I've been married to for, we've been married almost 42 years if I hadn't been raped. Because the day after I was raped, I filled out the forms to apply to move to Canada. I'd had them for 3 months and just didn't do anything about it. And I don't know, I was just not sure what I was going to do. But there's something about the timing. The very day after I did it, it was like, I'm out of here. It was, I think, what my mind was saying in one way or another. And if I had not moved to Canada then, I might have moved in a month and I might have met Barry. Who knows? But it's not nearly as likely, you know. So. Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, Louisa, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the wildfire experience that happened a few years ago and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, okay. Barry and I were backpacking along a part of the Northern California coast, considered the last pristine wilderness part of the state coast. It's called the Lost. Very, very beautiful, very wild, very inaccessible. This was our third time backpacking, so we knew the area. It was our first night. It was an evening. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening. It was in about this time of year, about May. This was 9 years ago. And there was some breeze, but the breeze was coming and going. You know, it wasn't all the time. Anyway, we were starting to make. Barry was kind of at our campsite. There's no campgrounds. It's all wild. So we just found a place to pitch our tent. And Barry's facing this way and he's kind of lighting the stove. I'm over this way chopping some vegetables. So eye contact. And suddenly Barry yells at me. He says, "Boo!" That's his nickname for me. "Boo!" And I turn and I suddenly see this fire. The gas stove had caught it was lighting, and then a gust of wind caught it and took it. And we were not far from a cliff. So as we were looking, suddenly the fire is starting to move in that direction. Anyway, we just grabbed we were just kind of crazy, just grabbing your stuff. At first we were trying to stamp out the fire, but it was impossible because the wind was suddenly going. And all I can remember is I was thinking, where are my boots? Were they already burned? Because I thought back without my boots. But nonetheless, there was a little brook, not much of one, but a little stream, not very far. So we were throwing everything on the other side of the stream. And finally, there was nothing. I mean, most of the tent was gone. We just didn't know what we had. So basically, I walked over across the stream to see what we had over there, because we can remember what we threw over there. Barry ended up kind of cleaning up a little bit of what was left, and we just saw this fire like heading up the cliff. It was obviously out of control. So we went over there. Well, fortunately, my boots were on the other side. I had forgotten, but I'd thrown them over in all that chaos. So I picked up my boots, put them on, and we got the pieces together. About half a mile back the way we had come was another bigger creek with some people camping. And we went over there and told them, and we didn't really have a tent, but we put our sleeping bags. One of them was already burnt, but at least it was still sleepable in. And we sort of made do that night. And that was so weird. As it got darker and darker, you could go stand on a little rock and you could see the red flames just going right up the cliffs, all the way to the top of the range. It was a wild night. Anyway, we got up really, really early, headed off back to the little store where we had started from. And happily, by the time we got there, they already knew about the fire. Someone had alerted them. They were on it. It was that we didn't, it was already being tackled. So anyway, the bottom line is, we were really scared that we would be by Wildfire, the Department of California's Department of Fire. And indeed, we were. They had a year to charge us. And the day before the statute of limitations, the day before the deadline, we got this certified letter in the mail charging us, I think fining us about $110,000. And the whole question was, that we talked about with a lawyer, was it accidental? Were we negligent? Where is that line? It was sort of a gray area. I mean, the negligence could be, you're supposed to draw a circle of, you sort of move grass out. We did, but perhaps we should have more. It was an older stove. Perhaps that was negligent not to have the most modern type so that you could be sure you have the best airtight kind of mechanisms and so on. Anyway, fortunately, to our shock, we discovered that our rental insurance covered it, which is sort of odd because I don't see why rental insurance should cover something that happened 60 miles away, but it did. So we didn't pay. But the bigger issue, I think, for us was, wildfires have become a huge issue, very much all in California and along the anywhere in the West Coast, but also in other parts of the world, Australia, it's just a huge issue. I think I'm very glad that it happened 9 years ago and not, say, 4 years ago, because even though the event wouldn't feel different, I think I know I would feel more defensive if it had happened 4 years ago, simply because it's such a big deal, fires now. Barry and a friend of ours went back there about 6 months later to pick up, because we left some of our stuff there behind some sort of a rock or something, because we were trying to make real haste to leave and not have extra stuff to carry. So he went back with a friend to get that stuff 6 months later. And the difference, I mean, the grass was beautiful. It was so fertile. Everything looked gorgeous. And so it really makes me understand the whole purpose of controlled burns, that it makes sense and it's not bad for the land to have some fire. But anyway, it was it was a very scary experience, both physically, financially. I felt guilty. I felt bad about it. At the same time, I just feel like it really was okay. And I don't know, maybe some critters may have died, but certainly no humans, no structures, and no major animals died. So I'm sort of left with wow, that was a wake-up call. We bought a different stove. We have a modern camping stove now that is, as foolproof as you can get, and just hope for the best. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that story with us, Louisa, and thank you for spending some time with us today. Appreciate all of your thoughts and insights on what we're going through. Okay.
Well, thank you. Very much enjoyed meeting you, and I look forward to watching more interviews with you.
There'll be more coming, so thanks very much.
Thank you.